Do you want to hear a story about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire?
Will you give a few seconds of your time?
Good evening, folks.
Kennedy died.
The atomic power plant in the city of Kiev was damaged.
How do you measure such an astonishing moment in history?
The energy crisis.
Who were gathered at St. Peter's Square at the Vatican today.
You want to hear my story?
Okay, so last week we left off basically where the Roman Republic had been in power for, and I'm just going back through my notes, almost 500 years, from 509 BC to 27 BC. Again, we talked about this last week. Just crazy to believe that this big, massive period in history is, 1,500 years ago.
It's hard to think of 500 years, let alone what was happening 1,500 years ago.
We left off where Julius Caesar had been killed. His heir Octavian, who was his adopted son, and one of his lieutenants, Mark Antony, had defeated Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, in 42 BC. Then what happened is, well, essentially, we'll get straight into it. We're now talking about the transition from the Roman Republic to what is effectively known as the Roman Empire. And this period of time spans from 27 BC to 476 AD. So again, another 500 years. So what we're going to talk about in this story is essentially what happened over those 500 years, how the Roman Empire grew, different periods it went through, and then we'll end with basically how it fell apart. I've got some facts about the Roman Empire as well, and that'll basically do it. Also, throughout the story last week, we made a lot of references to things like Game of Thrones and how things are happening today. So don't worry, that theme will continue throughout this story in the Roman Empire as well. So in doing the research, there's just so many things that I saw in regards to how things were done and who was in charge and all that jazz. And then I was thinking to myself, there's a few world powers and a few countries around the world at the moment that you could actually pull out pieces of what was going on in the Roman Empire, and you can place them in today and they make a lot of sense. So Octavian, Julius Caesar's adopted son, and Mark Antony, they overthrew, as I said, Brutus and Cassius, who had murdered Julius Caesar. But then they turned on each other. So it's kind of like the old wrestling, two wrestlers become friends, they form a tag team, win a couple of titles, and then usually what they do to jazz things up, one wrestler turns on the other, and then, they have the big fight at the end. So that's probably where they got a lot of wrestling storylines from. So Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at a battle which was called the Battle of Actium. And that was the final war of the Roman Republic, and that was in 31 BC. So Octavian is basically, he's the victor. He's the big man on campus. Everyone's kind of, getting behind him, I guess. It's kind of like I was watching Game of Thrones the other day, and it's when Stannis killed Renly, and then literally overnight, all of Renly's bannermen are kneeling before Stannis and calling him king and, jumping from one side to the other. So there'll be plenty of Game of Thrones references. So in 27 BC, which is where this Roman Empire period kicks off, the Senate, So, you know, you got your senators. Wasn't Pauline Hanson, so they probably had some senators that kind of knew what they were doing. And the people of Rome made Octavian princeps, which is known as the first citizen. So they made him the first citizen of Rome. So many words. I could do a top 10 list of words that I'd never heard of before doing research for this story. So they made him princeps with proconsular imperium. And they gave him the name Augustus, which means the venerated. I don't know what the word venerate means. Have you ever heard the word venerate before?
Can't say I have.
No. So it's not really important. So by this stage, they had basically declared him the first citizen of Rome, given him the name of Augustus. And essentially what was going on is that the Republic was still going on, but it was in name only. Everyone kind of knew he was in charge. It was this guy Augustus, or Octavian, Julius Caesar's adopted son. So thus began a period of peace and prosperity within the empire. The people loved him. All the civil wars had ended. So we talked about how there was a few civil wars towards the end of the Roman Republic era. So I was trying to think of a modern day reference for someone who was universally loved. The only person I could think of was Barack Obama.
Oh, I was going to say The Rock.
So in 4 or 8 years' time, when The Rock becomes president, that'd be the equivalent, I guess. He's gonna be president one day, isn't he? Don't you think?
I think if he ran, he would win.
I think exactly right. I'm always interested to see what side he would run on. I'm not sure if he's a Republican or a Democrat.
I think he'd start his own party.
The Rock Party.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd vote. See, you and I aren't Americans, so we can't vote, but we would vote for. I'd vote for The Rock tomorrow.
Definitely.
Did you ever have his alarm clock app?
I did download it at one point, but I never used it, if I'm being honest.
See, no other leader in history has had his own alarm clock app.
No.
So, no, I don't even think Augustus had an alarm clock app either during the Roman Empire. So, good guys in charge. And basically, there's two terms here, which I've heard these terms before. You've heard of the term de facto before.
Mm-hmm.
So it says in the research, he held the power of a monarch de facto, if not de jure. Now, when was the only ever time you've heard the term de jure?
Other than now, I don't know.
Soup. Soup of the day. Soup of the day. Soup de jour. So he was the de facto in charge, if not in charge, really, on the day. And so during his rule, they made up a new constitutional order, so that upon his death, this new order, as was before, it's basically, he set a whole bunch of rules in place. He said, look, this place is fucked. I don't think he had a Medicare for all strategy. I'm not sure about what his stance on bringing the troops home was, but he basically he had a really good, I guess, what's the word, mandate from the people to do things. He did things which it sounds like he was a good guy. And when Tiberius took over from him, he basically inherited this new constitutional order. And thus began a period of 200 years in the Roman Empire, which was known as Pax Romana, which means Roman peace. So for 200 of this 500-year period, Rome's looking all right. No more civil war. I mean, you're never going to have 100%, utopia. But it sounds like during this period of time that, Rome was a pretty good place to be. There was social stability. There was economic prosperity that there'd never been before. So the people are happy, the people are prosperous. It sounds like, free trade, and people will be able to go out and, earn a crust. And then, interestingly enough, as I said, there's never going to be 100% support for anybody. And it said here that there were uprisings, but the uprisings were that infrequent. And when the uprisings did come about, they were dealt with, and the words that I found were swiftly and mercilessly.
As it should be.
As it's exactly right. So when you hear about rulers and kings and emperors and whatever name you want to give someone who's in charge, because let's be honest, what is it? It's 2020, and I don't think in the current civilization there's one group of people that has got ruling or governing right.
Yeah,
would that be fair?
That's fair to say.
So, if nothing else, all you can ask for is strong leadership at the top, no?
Yes.
So, as you said, and I agree, as it should be, let's be honest, he's probably not going to get every decision right. He's probably going to, he's probably going to whiff. He's probably a climate denier, I reckon. He's probably wanting to pull out of the Paris Accord. And there's going to be a few people that are going to jump up and say, "Oh, I don't agree with you, Augustus." And he's going to, and like literally, the next day you go to their house and they go, "Oh, where's Tom? Remember, Tom was, questioning Augustus. Oh, you don't hear from Tom anymore. He's gone." It's kind of like you've seen the movie The Godfather.
Yes.
So Paulie was one of their drivers in the early part of the first movie, and then Marlon Brando gets whacked on the street, and it's on a day where Paulie called in sick, who usually would have been guarding Don Corleone, and fucking Fredo's there fumbling his gun out of his pocket. And then obviously they realised that Paulie had, sold out the family. And then so they took Paulie, and then there's that scene where they drive Paulie out to the country, shoot him in the back of the head, leave him in the car. And then there's that famous line, "Leave the gun, grab the cannoli." And then there's that scene where I think it's, what's his name? The big fat guy, Clemenza. "Oh, where's Paulie? Oh, we don't see Paulie no more." So that would be pretty similar to what would have happened if anyone would have tried to rise up and, deal with Octavian, the Augustus. There was one small problem though. Because of this new constitutional order that he'd set up, he was outliving a number of talented potential heirs. So remember back in the last episode, we talked about that, it wasn't just your family bloodline and that's who was king. Yep. or whatever. Mm-hmm. So he's leading. All these people in charge are potentially all these people that are around him going, "Oh, it's like when you work in a company, people leave employers because they can't wait around forever to get promoted."
Yeah.
So that's what happened, unfortunately. So that was one small problem that this dynasty had. Now, this dynasty was known as the Julio-Claudian dynasty. So there's going to be a few different dynasties that I'm going to talk about in this story. So now this dynasty included Octavian, Augustus, and then the emperors after him were Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. And there's an interesting TV show currently on Amazon Prime, which is talks about Nero, how he was pretty mad, but how he may have saved Rome. Mm-hmm. Now, this dynasty lasted until 69 AD. So from 27 BC to 69 AD. So what are we looking at? We're looking at almost 100 years, yeah? Mm-hmm. Yep. And then another Game of Thrones reference, that was before they yielded to a gentleman by the name of Vespasian. and that was known as the Year of Four Emperors, which reminded me of Game of Thrones, the War of the Five Kings. So there was Stannis, Renly. No, I'm only joking. It wasn't either of them. There was he then founded the Flavian dynasty, and so that there was a period of time where there was, I guess, new regime in charge, and then that was closely followed by again, I'm going to butcher this name, so apologies. The Nerva Antonine dynasty, which produced 5 good emperors, and you are going to know the last one. So there was Nerva, Trajan, and during Trajan's rule, he was actually credited with the biggest expansion of the Roman Empire, and I'm going to go through some information at the end of this episode which talks about how vast the Roman Empire actually was. So there was Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and are you familiar with a gentleman by the name of Marcus Aurelius?
The Stoic. Is that him?
Well, he was referred to as the philosophically inclined Marcus Aurelius. Do you know what Marcus Aurelius' son was named?
No.
Commodus.
Gotcha.
Better known as Joaquin Phoenix in the movie The Gladiator.
It's funny, I saw a picture of him today, literally like a screen grab of the comparison between what he should have looked like and what he looked like in the movie, and it was pretty close.
Yep. So apparently the Gladiator's pretty close to the mark. Or Gladiator, I should say, not The Gladiator, the movie Gladiator. So apparently Gladiator's pretty close to the mark. So you're familiar with the storyline from the movie Gladiator? So Marcus Aurelius and his son Commodus ruled together for 3 years, from 100. So we're now up to 177 AD. And then for the 3 years following, he ruled together with his son until Commodus ruled solely from 180 AD to 192 AD. I wasn't able to confirm nor deny whether he tried to fuck his sister. Wasn't able to confirm nor deny if he jabbed Russell Crowe in the side before sending Russell Crowe out to fight a tiger. Wasn't able to confirm or deny any of those. But according to the Greek historian Dio Cassius, this period of Commodus ruling, and then this Greek historian Dio Cassius says it was when the kingdom of gold turned into one of rust and iron.
Right.
So just like the movie, he fucked everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's why I think the movie was pretty close to the mark. So, Edward Gibson, another historian, was among many historians who basically labelled this. This is when everything started going downhill. Now, bear in mind, we're only at 192 AD, and the Roman Empire has still got another just less than 300 years to go. So, you had 200 years of Pax Romana, good guy Rock in charge, just rock bottoming anyone who'd, come up and try and laying the smack down. He's probably still had a movie career, I reckon. He was probably doing some side hustles because, if he was like the Rock, he just was never stopped working. But yeah, so with 300 years left of the Roman Empire, that's when it started to go downhill. So it's interesting. Like, Australia is only 200 years old.
Yeah, right. Well, since it's been settled.
That's right.
Yeah.
Since it was invaded by the white Europeans. But like we talked about at the start, our whole country from beginning to now is 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
The Roman Empire is just getting ready for 200 years of shit. After 200 years of prosperity. It's fucking crazy.
It is crazy. So how far back does, for some context, do we know how far back were Aboriginals in Australia before before everyone else showed up and ruined everything.
Well, I'm pretty sure most reports say that the Aboriginals have been in around for thousands of years, no?
Yeah, because that's what I thought. I mean, it's fair to say that whilst all this was happening in Rome, like everything was kicking on in Australia.
So it says here, like I just did a quick Wikipedia entry, and it talks about 11,700 years ago.
That's kind of mind-blowing.
That's fucking mind-blowing. So, again, just to have another dig at people who are religious, that was all God's plan, right? That it was all going to be here before he created it, or I don't know, whatever. Anyway, so the decline of the Roman Empire. So it's 212 AD now. And during the reign of the emperor, and again, going to butcher his name because that's what we do, Caracalla, Caracalla. That sounds about right. Caracalla, yeah,
Yep.
That'll do.
Yep.
Cool. Roman citizenship was granted to all freeborn inhabitants of the empire. So we're now in a period called the Severan dynasty. Severn, the Severan dynasty. I guess the dynasties connotes, like, I guess, the period of time of what kind of person was in charge or who the people were in charge, I guess. I'm guessing that's how it works. And again, talk about a decline. During this period, emperors routinely murdered or executed. So 200 years of peace and prosperity, but now we're in a period where, fuck, if you're the emperor, good luck if you last a couple of weeks.
So who's taken the job?
I could have, look, again, like I talked about last week, I could have made this episode 3 hours. So I could have gone through literally the whole timeline of every emperor, how he won, how he lost, how he died, yada, yada, yada. People who are listening to this podcast, I will recommend that if you have any of the streaming services on, there are tons of TV shows, documentaries, miniseries, movies that can depict these times. But for the purpose of the story, we'll keep it rolling. We're now in a period where they're calling it the crisis of the 3rd century. So there's constant invasions. So people, like, if you look at if you're living back at that time, right, and you're another country and you go, fuck, Rome's a mess, let's go fucking take over that place. They're right for the picking, yeah? There's civil strife. There's economic disorder. There's a plague, much like today. If you just look at those things, invasions, Russia's constantly annexing other countries. Civil strife, look at America. Economic disorder, look at America. And a plague.
Sounds like a good few years, good few decades.
Yeah, exactly. But all of those 4 things are happening right now.
Yeah, true. But I'm not saying that I'm enjoying it now either.
No, exactly right. And then a gentleman, I say gentleman, I don't know how gentlemanly these people were, but a bloke, we'll just call him a bloke. Old mate Aurelian steps in and he reigns from 270 to 275 AD, and he's a bit of a stabilizing figure. So again, you had Commodus, choked his father into his chest. I'm not sure if that really happened. The decline of the empire, invasion, strife, economic disorder, plague. Aurelian comes in and goes, fuck, this needs to sort this shit out. Let's get back on track. And then a bloke by the name of Diocletian completed the restoration of the empire. So, okay, fuck, the empire was in ruins. It's like how many, I was saying this to someone the other day, when, again, another Game of Thrones reference, how many times did Winterfell cop it and just seem to always just bounce back?
Yep.
In Game of Thrones? It's like got burnt down, nah, it's fine. Got savaged by the dragons in the Battle of Winterfell, nah, it's fine. Yeah. just keep on going. He declined the role of princeps, so he declined being the first citizen. He was the first emperor to be addressed as domini, which means master or lord. So you can tell by that little slight, difference of how he wants to be addressed and thought of, that he doesn't want to be the first citizen. He wants to be the master or the lord.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not of the people and not for the people. He's just above the people, I guess.
Okay.
And he was the one who brought the most concerted effort against the perceived threat of. I'll give you a guess. What was the perceived threat that he saw coming, that he wanted to war against?
Oh, damn it! I was going to make a Game of Thrones joke, but I couldn't remember what they were called.
The sparrows.
No, what was the main villain?
Joffrey.
Not Joffrey, like the Night King or whatever it's called.
Oh, the Army of the Dead.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, playing the role of the Army of the Dead back in this period of time was a little thing called Christianity.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and they called this the Great Persecution. So what did Diocletian do? He divided the empire into 4 regions. Mm-hmm. So he carved it up. And each region would be ruled by their own emperor called a tetrarchy. Now, I think I've given a wrong pronunciation and accent to that. So tetrarchy, Tetrarchy. So all fixed.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
He goes, oh, I've come again. He's the rock part 2, apparently. I've fixed it. We're sorted. There was some shit going on. I'll tell you, Christianity. No, we won't worry about that. I'll basically, carve the empire up into 4 regions. So New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, and South Australia. The 4 big ones. And I'll put someone in charge. Okay, so he abdicates. He's fixed it. He goes, I've abdicated. Him along with his co-emperor, they abdicate. They go, done. I don't want to fucking be in charge anymore. I've obviously fixed the problem. Guess what happens? The tetrarchy soon collapses. So he didn't fix it, really.
But it sounds like he's done what all politicians do.
Yeah, that's right.
Just put in, temporary fix, look good in the moment, and then it becomes someone else's problem.
He steps off Air Force One, lifts up a thumb and says, mission accomplished.
Yep.
Yeah. So then there's a bloke called Constantine the Great. He was the first emperor to convert to Christianity. And he establishes a little city by the name of Constantinople as the new capital of the Eastern Empire. So during Constantinian and Valentinian dynasties, the empire, so they've now basically, it's now East and West. Like, think of East and West Germany, yeah? So there's dual power centers. One of the power centers is in Constantinople. The other power center is in Rome. And so he's basically, Christianity is now taken over. Now there's a bloke by the name of Julian and his advisor Mardonius. They attempted to restore classical Roman and Hellenistic religion. So they obviously were, I guess, I'm guessing that's what you'd call Roman Catholics, yeah? Mm. So you got the Catholics and the Christians, which, I don't know, I'm always confused, but I always thought it was the same thing, but clearly it isn't. Anyway, we digress. Theodosius, number 1, you know how they've got, like, Roman numerals after their name?
Mm-hmm.
In my notes, I just put the number 1. So I'm calling him Theodosius number 1. Now, he was the last emperor to rule over East and West. And he died in 395 AD. And he installed Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. So that can't have gone down too well, yeah?
I feel not.
I feel not. I mean, can anyone say Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland? So we're now early in the 5th century. The Western Empire. So you got the Western Empire, the Eastern Empire. That's how it's basically split up now. You've heard of Attila the Hun?
Yep.
So the Western Empire successfully fought him off. I don't think they used wildfire, but anyway, they got rid of him. But during this period of time, there was a lot of Germanic people coming to Rome, and they were obviously helping the empire fight off all these invaders. But due to the fact that these people who had come into like the empire, their loyalties were a bit dubious. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, you're helping us now, but are you really helping us? Well, not really. And then so basically it's around about this time now. We're looking at the early 5th century. So this is when the Roman Empire starts to crumble from within, like every great empire does. It's usually not external forces. It's usually infighting and all that kind of shit. And then basically it all ended with this bloke, a Germanic warlord. Now, I'm really going to butcher this name. Now, it's Odoacer. Odoacer, I'm going to call him. He was the... Yeah, go.
No, I was going to say, like I said to you last week, there's no way I could have ever told this story. I think you're doing well.
Thank you. So he forces Romulus Augustulus. I think they just used the same names by the looks of things and just add a couple of extra letters by the looks of things. Anyway, so he was the one that forced Romulus Augustulus to abdicate in 476 AD. Thus is the end of the Roman Empire as we know it. What he does, though, this Odoacer bloke, is he takes over the West, but he places himself under the rule of the Eastern Emperor Zeno. So him and Zeno start dealing with start working out some deals, yeah? Mm-hmm. So effectively this warlord Odoacer is now in charge of Italy. The Eastern Emperor Zeno, the Eastern Empire is also known by this stage as the Byzantine Empire. And it goes on to say, so obviously that's essentially when the Roman Empire essentially is beaten. But it goes on to say, and then I'm skipping well ahead here, that the last Roman emperor, Constantine 11 Palaeologus, anyway, Constantine 11 I'm going to call him. He was the last Roman emperor to die. He died on the 29th of May, 1453 AD. And he died during the battle. He died in battle during the siege of Constantinople against a bloke by the name of Mehmed II and his Ottoman forces. So, just to give you some context, I'm going to go through. We'll end with again a few more facts. The Roman Empire, one of the largest empires in history. It had contiguous territory. So you think of, like, if you can picture the map of the world, yeah? Picture a globe, yeah? Mm-hmm. It had contiguous territories throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East.
So, what I'm curious, how did they decide that was the last emperor?
Well, because when he died, I guess whenever someone conquers, they decide how things are going to be, I guess. So it's almost like, because obviously we have votes, so if we voted one day to become a republic, well, then that's the end of the Queen's rule of Australia, yeah?
Right.
We just don't go to war over it, we have a vote.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. There's a Latin phrase which was used in the time, imperium sin fine, which means empire without end. So basically at the time, the thought process and the ideology was neither time nor space limited the empire. So I'm guessing they're like, if things went the empire's way, It's kind of like Palpatine in Star Wars. You're not a Star Wars fan, but it's like the whole plan was they're going to fucking take over the world.
And the galaxy.
And the galaxy, that's right, exactly. Exactly. During the reign of Augustus, a global map of the known world was displayed for the first time in public at Rome. Now, here's my question. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Who draws these maps?
I've often thought that, but I thought they just kind of did it on the fly as they were discovering land, wasn't it?
Would you be surprised if Australia's not really the shape of Australia?
Well, maybe once upon a time, but probably not so much today.
Yeah, because I guess we've got a little bit more better technology and satellites and all that shit, stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so the first map turns up in Rome under the reign of Augustus. As I said earlier, the largest expansion of the Roman Empire was under the Emperor Trajan, and now he reigned for 19 years between 98 AD and 117 AD. Now he had a region 5 million square kilometers. Now, this is not going to mean much based on today's numbers, but there was a population estimate back then of between 55 and 60 million people that were under the Roman Empire. That's been updated in recent times, and it's more like 70 to 100 million people. Again, in this day and age, like 300 odd million people live in America, 1 billion people live in China and India. But back then it was between 1/6 and 1/4 of the world's population.
I mean, it's still a lot of people.
So imagine if India and China had their own big, like, unified empire. That would essentially be the equivalent of how much that they ruled. The largest population of any unified political entity in the West until the mid-19th century. That's crazy.
It still just blows my mind that this was so long ago.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the hard part. You know, you're so caught up in what's happening in this little window of 3 months.
Yeah.
To try and like think of 2,000 years ago.
We just think of 2020 in context and all the stuff that's gone on in 2020.
Exactly.
And yet earlier in this story we talked about a 200-year period of Pax Romana where it was Roman peace, followed by 300 years of shit. And I'll finish off with this. Each of the 3 largest cities in the empire, Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, each of those 3 was almost twice the size of any city in Europe at the beginning of the 17th century.
And now, folks, it's time to say
Thanks again for dropping in.
We hope you'll make this a weekly visit.
Bring the family. Hope you enjoy the evening as much as we've enjoyed having you
Drive home
here.
carefully and come back again soon. Good night.
Good night now.